Welcome to the MS-Perspektive podcast, Perspective with a K as I'm German. I'm Nele von Horsten, MS patient, patient advocate and author. I'm bringing you interviews, inspiration and information about living with multiple sclerosis and show you ways how you can positively influence the disease and make the best out of your diagnosis. On ms-perspektive.com you will find the show notes, 11 free tips as a PDF and lots of other information. And now the show begins. Thanks for tuning in again and welcome to episode number 92, Empowering the MS Community, Advocacy, Diversity and Inclusion with patient expert Roxy Murray. Hi Roxy, such a pleasure to have you on the show and hello to London.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And before we actually start with the interview, it would be lovely if you could introduce yourself to the audience so they know who is with me on the podcast today.
Oh, absolutely. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Roxy Murray. I live with relapsing remitting MS. I am an MS patient advocate and a disability advocate all round. I combine fashion and style with advocacy. I am a pansexual femme woman and I bring visibility to the invisible.
Fantastic. And it's really important that somebody advocates for the invisible people. So can you maybe briefly share your personal journey with MS and how it inspired you to become a patient advocate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I now have had MS for 18 years. Which is literally half my life. I'm 36 now, so my first symptoms were presented at 18. I woke up very typical MS. I had blindness in my right eye, double vision in my left eye. Obviously, you can imagine at 18 years old, it was a bit of a shock to wake up like that, and you don't know why that's happening. And obviously, I was rushed to an eye hospital at that point, had a few tests and stuff. They suspected a brain tumor. And obviously told me that when I was by myself, which is also a bit of a shock when you're 18 by yourself and someone's saying you have a brain tumor and you think you're starting life. And you get that news, you kind of don't know how to handle it. And that was fine. They then sent me to a general hospital and I'd done a few more tests and stuff. And actually at that point, they didn't tell me I had MS. They said to me I have lupus. And they said that I had benign intracranial hypertension and antiphospholipid syndrome. So for people that don't know what that is, lupus, an autoimmune disease that's very similar to MS, but not quite the same. Antiphospholipid syndrome is the thickening of the blood. So it's on warfarin or low dose of aspirin. And then benign intracranial hypertension is your spinal fluid raising too quickly and putting pressure on your brain, your optic nerves. Which caused them to give me therapeutic lumbar punctures. And if you've had a lumbar puncture, there's nothing therapeutic about it. And I was getting those every 6 to 8 weeks at the start of my journey. So you can imagine the trauma that came with that.
But that's ugly. That's really ugly. And how long did it took them to understand that you had multiple sclerosis?
8 years.
Wow. 8 years you had to go to that procedure.
Yeah, it wasn't all the time. They tried to give me a few different drugs. So they gave me some, I can't think what it's called now, but there was a drug which helped your spinal fluid pressure stay low. So there was only, I had to express how I felt, right? So I was like I mentally and physically, I'm getting trauma from the situation. And I was basically avoiding the lumbar punctures. Like I was like, I'll just take the headaches, I'll take passing out, like I'll take all the things I'm having because I don't like needles anyways. And you've seen that needle. It's like huge. It's like having an epidural for people that have had children and you don't want that every couple of weeks. So I was avoiding it. And it was when I had a really bad relapse, while I was at university and I was doing a part-time job. I was sent to another hospital in Kent, which meant that I didn't see my regular doctors or anything. And I met a female neurologist and she was like to me, "You've had a stroke." And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." So your face looks like you've had a stroke. And I was looking in the mirror and I couldn't see it, Nelly. Like I just could not see that I had a stroke. So your face says like, it's like you've got palsy. She was like, you're telling me your story, and I don't hear a story of someone with lupus. I hear a story of someone with another autoimmune disease. She was like, I think it might be MS, but I need you to have another lumbar puncture to confirm this. And I was like, sorry, what do you mean? Like, because I didn't know that a lumbar puncture confirmed that you had MS. Like, I wasn't savvy, didn't know what MS was. But I knew that I wasn't dealing with lupus because I'd met other people with lupus and we weren't saying the same things to each other. We didn't have the same experiences. She was like, I'll give you one more. I'll sedate you, which no one ever offered me. And she's like, I will test the spinal fluid. So you can imagine the amount of lung punches I've had. I realized that no one had tested the spinal fluid. Like, my brain was like, are you actually serious? No one in those amount of lung punches and the pressure you've taken out ever thought, let's just test it and see what's going on here. She did that. A couple of weeks later, she was like, yeah, so I've confirmed that you have multiple sclerosis because we've checked your oligoclonal bands and it's presenting MS. And it was a mix of like being really happy, which is strange because I didn't know what MS was, but it felt like, you know, when someone speaks to you and you just trust in what they're saying instantly, it felt like at least it had a name and it made sense. But then it took a while, and then I realized my anger came in and my frustration because I started to realize what I'd been through for the last 8 years and the reasons why.
Wow, that's so horrible. But I mean, it makes totally sense. We had I'm studying multiple sclerosis management with all these neurologists, and one module was diagnosis and differential diagnosis, because as there is not that one test to get a clear sign that it's multiple sclerosis, but you have to bring in altogether that symptoms, MRI, lumbar puncture tests, maybe some visual evoked potentials. So all these testings, and then you see, okay, it can't be these other diseases. It has to be multiple sclerosis. But I mean, living 8 years with a wrong diagnosis and such harsh treatment, that's really horrible. I feel very sorry for you, and I can totally understand your anger and being upset with that.
Thank you. It's also one of the things I never realized is they only ever imaged my brain. And actually, my first lesions were on my spinal cord, and it was caught by accident because the imagery they did in this time where they tested the spinal fluid, they caught the top of my neck on my spine and they found the first lesion. But because they weren't imaging outside of my brain, they couldn't see like any lesions to help confirm an MS diagnosis.
Okay, yeah. Hopefully there are not too many stories like yours where it takes people so long, and but I had a couple of them on the German podcast, so I know unfortunately there are, and hopefully in the future it will be less and lesser. So yeah, I mean, you went through much already. In your experience, what are some of the most effective coping strategies or self-care practices for managing the daily challenges of living with MS or seem to have lupus or other diseases or a stroke? I mean, you got a lot of diagnoses crashed into your face in a way.
Yeah, and so young as well. So I kind of didn't at the start have any coping mechanisms. In all fairness, I was in a case of denial. I was young. You know what it is like when you're at like 18, you want to do everything you shouldn't be doing. You want to like run, you want to travel. And I still really want to do that. Obviously, when I got my main diagnosis, that was 8 years later. So I was reaching 26 and 26. I'm trying to do maths. MS 2, 4, yeah, about 26. And I still didn't really have a good coping mechanism. I kind of like was happy that I knew what it was, but then was frustrated about how I was treated. I didn't know anyone with MS. I didn't even really understand what MS was. And obviously they tell you it's incurable. So you're like, okay, great. I've got this diagnosis, but it's incurable. So you kind of instantly, you don't figure out how to deal with something that's incurable. You kind of deal with your emotions first. And thank God I had a partner who I love dearly, who was like, look, you were obviously having a bad mental health situation with what you've been through. and what you're dealing with now. And I think you need to sit down with yourself and figure out and take time to process your emotion, because you're doing that thing where you're blocking everything out and you're blocking people out because you're trying to act like you're still strong, and it's okay to be vulnerable and weak. So that was my first thing, was finding a level of therapy, speaking about how it's actually feeling and dealing with my own emotions. Because 2 years after for 2 years after that diagnosis, I didn't really do much. I was depressed. I really was stressed and depressed about life, and I couldn't figure out how to change. So the things that I did obviously was get therapy and then also find a community of people. At this point, I didn't see anyone with MS my age, and I didn't see anyone with MS that was Black or brown or even Asian. And I was trying to find people because I realized my diagnosis was based on my race. My mum is white Irish, but obviously when I present into a medical scenario, people don't see that side of me at all. They see a brown woman standing in front of them. And I realized that was why they linked me to lupus more than they would link me to MS, because at that point, there wasn't the research, at least in the UK, that helped show that actually a lot of Black people have MS. So I looked towards America, because when I started using Instagram, thank God for Instagram, and use hashtags what's MS and notes MS, I was finding a lot of Americans, and I was finding a lot of diversity, and my mind was blown because it allowed me not just to connect through my age, but also through my race, and to find that actually there was a lot of similar stories like mine about people that, due to their race were getting misdiagnosed or didn't actually know this was a thing, or there was a lack of information in communities like the Mexican community. And how did we all get through this? A lot of it is having people to talk to. I'm also 20 odd and dealing with MS. What does that look like for you? And also seeing images that were outside of MS, wheelchair, old age. Yes, you could be that. It can become that. But I'm only 26. So is that my tomorrow, or is that my in 40 years? But what does today mean? And how do I deal with today? So I would say my biggest coping mechanism was community. And then it became care, exercise, health, and diet stuff.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. And upfront our interview, I just prepared a questionnaire to initiative that is looking into the genetics a bit more in detail, because I think it really is important. And at last ACTRIMS win, and I just joined digitally due to my little daughter, which can be heard in the background every now and then. They are doing more research on why certain people with certain genetic backgrounds, being it more Asian or more Hispanic or more Black, have MS, because there are different reasons why people get MS, and maybe that will be that will lead us to a more specified therapy in the future, hopefully.
Yes, yeah, I've been doing a lot of those things. Not a questionnaire, but I took part in the steering group for the ADAM study, which is the first one in the UK that does that. And it looks at Ashkenazi Jews, Asian background, people from Black backgrounds, to see where the ethnic diversity leads us, because obviously a lot of us haven't been in the studies previously for the drugs or the therapies that we take. So we want to see would this change it for the whole community? Because I think there's a belief sometimes that if you do ethnic diversity, are you just creating another situation? In actual fact, what you're doing is you're creating a more diverse cohort so that all races benefit. And it's not just a them against us. It's more of if we have all the data, then we have all the data. And therefore, hopefully, we can help everyone. And that's the beauty, I think, in having visibility of all the people that deal with multiple sclerosis.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does your experience as a diversity and inclusion specialist shape the way you advocate for MS patients and others with chronic illnesses?
It makes me more unapologetic, in all fairness. When you don't see yourself, you really fight a lot harder to shape spaces where people feel comfortable or people can see themselves. And the thing about seeing yourself is I can only represent my intersection. So I am multiple things. I am Black, mixed race, queer, femme, woman that loves fashion and has MS. That's the only people I can represent, right? I can't represent anyone else. I can represent an age, obviously. But I also need to make sure that the spaces, when I create space for other people to also share their voice, because when you speak to one person that has MS, you're speaking to one person that has MS. I know we both have MS, but our stories are not going to be the same, right? It's impossible. So you need to hear all of us. And I think it was weirdly fueled by my anger, obviously, of not seeing myself and not really getting the right answers. But actually, I realized that anger wasn't the way forward. Like, anger doesn't get you anywhere. Actually, compassion, storytelling is really good. Telling your story. And for me, it became anger to, do you know what? I never want anyone else to feel like I felt. I never want anyone else to have to go through what I felt. And if I can bring a space to the community so that they don't have to do that and I can bring change. A lot of the things I do currently outside of just EDI is like sexual health with MS and the fact of how that affects both males, females and non-binary people. And why is there a lack of information in multiple sclerosis in relation to your sexual health and your healthcare and your sensations? Because it does affect that. And is that different between information I'm getting versus someone that's male or someone that's Black's getting? We don't know unless we share stories. So I try to create, like I have a podcast where if you share people's stories, I think it's beneficial for us as patients, but I also think it's beneficial for companies and charities and other places like pharma that are creating change for us through drugs or therapies or different kind of spaces to understand what we truly need, because I think there's a higher level of honesty from a patient perspective. And I think that is also the case with EDI. I find in a lot of spaces cultivating it. If you speak to someone that looks like you, your level of honesty just goes up. When you know someone else has MS, you know, it's like you go into a room, you've got all these people and you speak in your pharma and it's great, industry is fantastic. But when you meet someone else with MS, like the wall just instantly drops and you have this beautiful connection where you go, you understand me. It's like an unspoken language. I know you know what I'm talking about. I know you understand me. And I think that's the one thing that I missed at the start of my journey that to me is the most important thing to cultivate for people.
Yes, absolutely. What is Damien always saying? MS is an ugly way to meet wonderful people.
Absolutely.
Or something like that. Maybe it's not exactly these words, but in that direction. So what are the unique challenges to the LGBTQIA plus individuals with chronic illness face, and how do you incorporate these issues into your advocacy work?
So a lot of the issues we face is just people thinking that actually involving us makes sense. It's one of those weird cohorts where you can't, like, I think even legally go to someone. So what's your sexual orientation? You must tell us. You can't always collect that data. So it's one of those things where unless you tell someone, they are never going to know. So I've always made it my thing to tell people, like, I'm a queer femme living with multiple sclerosis, so that other queer people know it's a safe space to be in. Because there's things that, like, I date someone who's trans, and I realized when we was doing menopause of MS, no one ever considered trans women in menopause of MS. And I found that really interesting. And then people were like, well, why do you keep going on about this thing? And, you know, like, they weren't born female. Okay, fair. However, they are on HRT. They are dealing with the same effects, and they also have MS. So why are we not bringing them into the conversation, B, understanding that they're dealing with the same symptoms and actually arguably a lot quicker than a female at birth individual? So how do we exclude them from conversations? I don't understand that. And how is this progressive? We need to create a progressive situation. That was one situation. Another is, like I talked to you about, like I always talk about sexual health. If when I go into a hospital, the only thing my doctor asks me is, do you want to have a baby? You've made me straight in your mind instantly. So everything you offer me is straight in your mind. I shouldn't have to tell you, well, actually, no, or I'm queer, or I date a girl, or all these things continuously, because you're not hearing me. I can go in more than once and you ask me the same question. Unless I'm asking you to do or say, I'm in a queer relationship and I actually want to have a child, can you help me figure it out? If I've told you I'm queer, respect that. And also maybe note that down so you understand what I need and how I need it. And I just feel like we're not considered an intersection. And we're not considered in just our lived experiences, but also our safety. Helen Ford's very good at looking at intersections of like not only race, but also social economics, where people live, disadvantages in humans of how they get care and how they deal with different things. And she talks about, you know, the lack of safe homes and safe spaces. And unfortunately, queer people do deal with that at a high disadvantage in a lot of spaces around Europe and America. That should be taken into consideration. In America, that can also affect the level of care you can get because you pay for it. In the UK, it can mean the difference between having a roof or a family network, a care network, people to talk to, people to take care of you, or people that you can just openly and honestly have conversations with or feel like you're in a safe space. And that's why that's become a very important part of what I do, because I want people to know that there is a safe space for them. There are people that are also queer. I know we're not incredibly visible. That's why my hashtag is I can't speak English right now. we're not invisible.
Better than me for sure.
It's the MS. Sometimes I go to say words and it like gets stuck in my mouth mid-sentence and I'm like, come on, get out. We are not invisible because we're not invisible. But, you know, society has made us invisible in so many spaces. And like women and like Black people, we are still fighting for our rights in so many spaces. We are still being attacked in so many different countries to this day through healthcare. So I need them to know, and for my community to know, it's okay to be you, even though there's so many spaces around telling us it's not. There are other people like you. We are dealing with very similar things, and together we can have a voice.
Yes, very, very important. And unfortunately, yeah, there is so much work to be done still. And I think even in Germany, there are lots of spaces where it's not safe, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. Hopefully this will change in the future and be equal at one point. So you can be whoever you are and it's not a problem at all. Mm-hmm. You often say empowered patients empower patients. Can you expand on what this means and how it guides your work?
Empowered patients empower patients means that if you give patients the right tools to empower themselves, they can empower each other. Empowerment is not something you can give to someone. I can't force you to be empowered, but I can tell you or give you services and things to help you along your way. And then it helps you make the right choices for yourself. If you know, it's like those DMTs. If you know all the drugs that are available to you, you get the moment to sit down and evaluate what your choices are. When you feel like you've made the choice, instead of the choice being forced upon you, it absolutely changes how you navigate through life. You know, and I think that's something people forget. And I also think for me, it means that you telling me a story is way more powerful than a neurologist or someone else telling me a story. And some people don't get that, but it's because you live that experience. You understand it outside of a book. There's little nuances of like a Sunday afternoon, you might be sitting with your child and you feel an emotion or you feel a thought or a sensation in your body. And the way you describe that is so different to any textbook could. And it can also make someone else that may also have been sitting on 6 o'clock on a Sunday evening with their daughter and they just feel that instant connection that you understand. And I think it makes people just not feel like they're alone. And I think feeling like you're not alone in itself is empowerment. And I think we don't give patients enough space to share their stories and share their voice, and to allow other patients to hear their voice outside of just being and answering questions for industry, pharma, or charities. Like, I didn't realize that my voice would have been powerful. I didn't start it with any agenda, or it was more my own therapy of having a podcast, being able to speak to people and just being like, if I like this conversation, surely someone else feels some level of empowerment from this conversation, that they understand that someone else feels like them. And sometimes it's just joy. It's like that thing of like, what did I achieve outside of just having MS? Did I get to go to Disneyland and enjoy that day? That's empowerment. Because when I first had MS, I didn't think I could get around Disney anymore in a day. And I felt like I wouldn't be able to walk. I lost a lot of my mobility in my MS journey. And having these boring grey mobility aids were not brightening up my world at all. And being able to find mobility aids like the Biarca and Neo Walks, and people that create these beautiful aids that are colourful and vibrant and adorned even in your name if you really want it to be. I always meet other people that don't know that exists. And then that's patient empowerment, because someone goes to me, I saw you talk. I didn't even know you had a mask, but what I did was I saw you holding. And I didn't realize that I could deal with my mobility in a way that didn't allow me to lose my personality. And I didn't realize that you don't have to be super professional and super articulate and super pharma-led or super like industry-led in the conversations you're having to be able to share your story. I've never shared my story because I felt too regular. No, you're not regular. Your story is powerful. Your point of view is powerful, and it's good for other people to hear it. But how do people know that they can do that without seeing someone like yourself or me or someone else already doing that, and knowing there's a space that's being cultivated for them to share their story? And I think that's where the patient empowerment comes. And I found that, like I said, through America. I never even knew what patient empowerment was until I realized America had all these different places where patients were just sharing their stories and actually getting paid for it, which blew my mind. So you're getting paid for existing. Yes. Wow. Okay, cool. This is a thing. Wasn't a thing in England, for sure.
Yeah. And I just had to think about Adra Shepherd, who is, like you, a very stylish person having MS and sharing her life. I mean, and it's such a good thing to hear that, no, it is not always easy, but you can find your way with all these struggles and getting along. And of course, you can be sad and you can be upset and you can have all these feelings. But at one point, hopefully, together with the community, you can move on and can find your way through all this ugly, nasty things.
Absolutely. With a little bit of style and a little bit of grace, you can go so far. And it changed how I thought about myself. I studied fashion for years, and I was like, oh, like, as shallow as it sounds, like, oh, I'm going to have to give up like how I want to adorn my body for my empowerment, because now my mobility is being compromised. What? And when I found those tools, I was like, wow. And also it changed the conversations people were having with me. They weren't like, oh, look at you, poor young girl, having a little crutch. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's like a pity party. Having a brightly coloured cane that lights up, or a yellow walking bike, people go, oh my God, what is that? That's incredible. What is this? And it didn't even ask me about my disability. It's like becomes the last thing you care about instead of the first thing that you enter. And it's never through pity. You realize it changes how they see you. And in actuality, of people going, I kind of want one and I don't have a disability. And you're like, yeah, see, now we're leading the way, you know?
Very good. Yes. So, I mean, you already gave some examples, but how do you work to ensure that the voices of MS patients, particularly those of the underrepresented groups, are heard in brand campaigns and community decisions? And what challenges do you need to overcome?
I don't stop talking. I don't stop saying, excuse me, there's not enough representation. I do it at work as well. Like, I'm like, have you looked at that picture? And they go, why? And they go, because there's no representation in that picture. There's no diversity. There's no inclusion. There's no mix of mobility. There's no mix of races or genders. Like, why are you looking at a photo and seeing a photo that to me is glaringly obviously not inclusive? And to you, you're like, oh yeah, it's fine. I don't understand that. And I also always ask to people, like, if I see an event, like, so the patient sharing their voice. And I do it in conferences all the time. People go, what do you mean? Why would they need to? What do you mean, why would they need to? Like, you're creating, say, tech or a situation where you're creating something that goes to patients. We are the end user, right? And if we're not in the room and there's no co-production with patients, how does that make sense? And I always come from an angle of like, are you not saving yourself money by doing this? If you bring us at stage 1, then again at stage 3, and then just before the end, arguably you save a lot more money because you are correcting those mistakes quicker and an easier time in your process rather than doing it at the end or delivering a product at the end or a service for people with MS, say, and you never asked us why or what we needed. And in the end, we go, we don't want this. What are you doing? This is terrible. And they go, oh, why didn't it work? Well, it didn't work because you didn't have us in the room. You didn't ask our opinions. And I think Trishna is very good at that. If you know Trishna, I think she's a fantastic patient advocate. And she's taught me
on my show.
Yes, she's taught me so much on my journey of like the power of what it is to be a patient, but the importance of us being in the room. And I am so grateful for her more than she'd ever know. Because we are part of the change. Even the conferences that we go to, the conferences we meet at, like, yes, it's great for neurologists and stuff, but the best feedback I've ever had at these conferences is when the patients go on stage, when the patients talk, when the patient experts share their experiences. People go, that was so much more insightful than any of the other talks I've been in, because I'm understanding how the patients feel. I'm understanding how to talk to them in a room when they come in to my clinic. And that's really important because it builds up relationships with people. And I guess I just share that with people. I share people's feedback. I show them how a room reacts to me talking versus them talking. And it's not an ego thing. It's important. It doesn't have to be me in the room talking, but it's if a patient's talking, how people like receive that and how important it is to create those spaces for it to be received and actually how it benefits them, benefits their campaigns, benefits their fundraising, all the things that they need to do to help us cure MS. And arguably we're closer than we've ever been. But is that because we've also have more patient experts than we ever had sharing their stories? So actually, when you want people to crowdsource fund or to donate to charities, are they donating because something you decided, or are they donating because they're actually hearing those lived experiences? And I guess that's kind of where I come from that. And it's not perfect. And I'm not perfect. And I don't think it'll ever be perfect. But I think unless you ask people questions and you offer your time, I do a lot of behind the scenes work, a lot of like work on different research projects like yourself or different things being cultivated to share my experiences or to help them find other people to share their experiences so that we keep those cohorts diverse and we diversify the diversity. And we keep changing the amount of people, because you can have 20 people in the room, the same 20 people for 3 years. It's now undiverse, right? You need to keep changing that. And you need to consider younger people too, and older people. Because we get into this weird space. It's like everything becomes relapsing, remitting. We forget progressive, or we get super progressive, but we forget the 13-year-olds with MS. And it's sad, but it's true. What do they need? And what's their future look like? Or have you I find it really hard to use LinkedIn because actually my brain is so programmed to like Instagram and YouTube. So I find it really hard sometimes to create content that works for that cohort of people. And it can get very frustrating because that cohort of people actually I need to speak to the most because they are usually the decision makers. But it's that fear, like I said to you earlier, like I don't think we need to be super professional individuals to be able to share our voice. But when you go on LinkedIn, you feel like you really have to be super professional. And like, it kind of sometimes takes the nuance out of your authenticity of who you are as a person, that messiness, that beautiful messiness that sometimes MS gives us. And I don't know where to put that on LinkedIn, but that is the thing that you'll get when I speak. And I think it's my superpower, but it's hard to wrap it up in a couple of words for someone to really understand you. And it's not necessarily a video based platform, right? It's not YouTube. So I don't want to spam LinkedIn with 100 videos of me speaking on a stage so people get what I want to say. So it's always finding like a way round to approach people in the right way without overwhelming them, but also that with a way of them understanding what you're trying to achieve, but without feeling like you're some way out of the fold as well. It's a massive balance between so many things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on LinkedIn, from what I see, Mark Webb is doing really a fantastic job. He's really reaching out to people, and I'm like always, oh yeah, he's doing so great. I'm just posting more or less my podcasts and not doing much, and there's little visibility. And Mark is coming with his true stories about his life and how it is for him, representing, of course, the wider MS community, but it really works what he is doing. And I'm glad he is there for all of us.
He is. He's like one of the greatest allies, honestly, in the community. He fantastic, great for advice, knows it all, lived it all. Like, his story is so interesting. And then he brings that to a stage so beautifully, and also does it with humor, which we can't forget humor, right?
Yes, with humor is always lovely and important. So you use art design and fashion styling in your advocacy work. How do these creative elements help to communicate the messages about MS, diversity, inclusion, and chronic illness? Of course, more on the other channels like Instagram, like YouTube, not so much on LinkedIn.
So I'd say for me, it just garners attention in a space or in a universe where arguably there's so many people trying to get people's attention. It's helpful when you look a certain way, or you can use design or have a design background to at least first and foremost get people to like double take, so they'll look, and then you can give them a message. And maybe it's from my background, like I love alternative culture, I love punk culture, I love like Catherine Hammett and stuff like that. And I always found like slogan t-shirts and fashion always had a notable, unique moment, like where we take from. Look at fashion shows, they're always political, art's very political. It's always a good way of basically getting a message across, I felt like. And I felt like it also allowed people to know how I was going to deliver my message through style, through imagery, through grace, through color, because like fashion and art and stuff, we are all colorful. We are a full rainbow and not just one color. And I just feel like it authentically is me. It allows me to be myself at the highest degree. And I think that's what makes me different to other people.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your podcast, the Sick and Sickening podcast. What motivated you to create that podcast, and what was your vision when you started it?
So my anger, obviously, my frustration at being misdiagnosed because I was brown and being young and feeling like I was invisible. But also I love to talk, as you can probably tell.
Are you kidding me?
And I didn't know anyone with MS. And I was like, I'm going to start by talking about my experiences. So I was just talking about like how my diagnosis, how that kind of went, what I kind of liked, what I felt like I was losing. And as I was sharing it on my Instagram, I started connecting with more people. And then I'd done some other podcasts with other people in America, which were really fun and insightful. So I actually enjoy talking to people. So why not record it? I had no agenda. I just felt like it's a nice space. It's a place where other people might just feel like it's nice to have some friends with MS also. And from then, it kind of branched outside of just MS. I started just generally talking about disability because I met so many people with just different disabilities and we were having very similar experiences just in healthcare industry. And I realized that also a lot of our conversations were being filtered, especially by social media, but also by other people that just didn't want to speak about taboo subjects. You know, race, sex, gender, like these things. To some people are still like, oh, do we have to do that? Like, can we just not keep it like this? And I'm not vanilla. Like, I like chocolate ice cream. I like mint chocolate chip. That's my vibe. I like to, you know, put a bit of glitter on things. And I want to hear people's real life experiences. This is reality. Tell me your reality. Hearing people being like, look, like part of my life was my family didn't understand what I was going through. They thought I was cursed, or my family tried to cure my MS with beef therapy. Like, these are things people need to understand. Like, it's not fun, and it's not going to be everyone's experience, but it is someone's experience. If someone else is dealing with this and wondering what is going on, they hear one story of someone else being like, yeah, like that's what my family did. But why did they do that? Okay, cool. Well, because some of the languages, like some of the information wasn't in the language they could read. So all they saw was this person doing these things, passing out, vibrating, body shaking. Oh, that person's cursed. Not like they couldn't get a book that told them in a language they could understand, but actually this is not, your child's not cursed. This is what they're going through. This is normal. This is the reason why it's happening. And here's the information you need to be able to help your child. Or realizing there's children with MS that have parents that are not from the country they live in, and they're first generation immigrants, and they're having to explain to their parents what they're dealing with. But they're also trying to understand what they're dealing with, and they're a child, and they're having to tell it to adults, and like what that boundary is and those barriers that they're dealing with and how that's playing out in their life, which means that they are like arguably having a weird experience while dealing with MS. And how do we change that? And I think that's what my podcast became, or like, what does it mean to go through depression? Or is that a normal thing we're all dealing with? Or how to empower yourself through fashion? It just became me talking about things that I felt like I was dealing with, or speaking to friends that I had, and just, yeah, it went to like endometriosis, but realizing someone could have MS and endometriosis, and how does that work? How does that look? Am I also dealing with that? Because I feel like there's certain things that happen in my life that also might mean I have a level of that. Or maybe these are signs and symbols I should look out for, because we both know with MS, you kind of put everything down to MS. So you sometimes forget that that's not quite normal and actually might not be MS. But I'm just going to say it's MS because I'm used to everything being MS, and you could overlook and miss massive part of your existence because of that.
Yeah. That sounds really great. And we are more or less at the end of our conversation, but we are coming to the quickfire Q&A session. Let's see how long your answers will be like.
1 second. Let me let this dog outside because she's scratching.
Okay.
Crazy.
So complete the sentence. For me, multiple sclerosis is?
Confusing.
Mm-hmm. Which website can you recommend for people living with MS?
Shift MS, I think, is one of my favorites.
Yes, I recommended this one quite a lot already. What development would you like to see in the field of multiple sclerosis in the next 5 years?
A cure.
Yeah, okay. Would be lovely, but I think that's not really realistic, Roxy.
Okay.
I'm sorry to be like that.
I know. The girl's got a dream, right? But if we're going to say realism, a actual good community network that's global.
Okay, so I think that is more possible than curing MS in 5. I mean, you never know with artificial intelligence, and supercomputer. But still, I think 5 years is a bit too high of a goal. Anyhow, what advice would you give to other MS patients or individuals with chronic illnesses who want to become advocates or share their stories?
Find a community of people and share your story for yourself, by yourself, and give it a good level of promo, because you will never understand how powerful your own voice will be and where it will take you.
Yeah, Absolutely. And I see all these people in the German community, and there are lots of them doing really a good job. And people are interested in all these stories. And of course, I'm getting now more and more the picture of the worldwide community. So finally, what message of hope or encouragement would you like to share with individuals living with MS?
But you're not alone. There are loads of us worldwide living with MS. You have a beautiful community of people that are ready to talk to you at any moment. And the beauty of having a global community is you could be up at 2 a.m. having a question, and there's always going to be someone to answer it. So yeah, just connect. We're here waiting for you with open arms.
Yep. How and where can interested people find you online, Roxy?
So I do have my own website now, crazy, which is www.themultiplesclerosisfashionista.com. On Instagram, I am the Multiple Sclerosis Fashionista. And on LinkedIn, I am Roxy Murray.
Fantastic. And of course, I will link all these accounts on my blog article and on the show notes. So you can just click on it to reach out to Roxy, or at least listen, hear, see her stories. Roxy, thank you very, very much. Thank you very much for all you're doing. It's so important, and it's so important to give all these underrepresented people a voice, a face, and to bring some glamour into MS. That's important as well.
Thank you so much.
And hope to see you at one of the next events. Probably not the next one, because I will go to the Tupati patient program. And my husband has his birthday, so I guess I will come back and see my family, but maybe the year afterwards.
Well, hopefully we'll make it happen. The whole year.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed the interview, learned something new, and maybe even got inspired to tell your own story. Because, as Roxy said a couple of times, it is important that each and everybody tells her or his story, as we are quite a heterogeneous group of people. And you will find people like you if you search social media, if you search like Shift MS or other places, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you are going, whatever you prefer. And I think that makes us feel less lonely. And it is important to get empowered, and it is important to raise your voice. And maybe you don't want to do that, but maybe you want at least to know there are people like you out there. So I'm very glad that Roxy is doing what she is doing, and I hope lots of other people are representing our very colorful community as well. And I know they are. By the way, next time there will be another special episode about ECTRIMS, and this time it will be about aging with MS, because this is something important. At one point we are all going to become old, and there are some certain things we need to think of, and the researchers, and how our MS evolves, or if it gets slower or whatsoever. And so next time it will be about this topic. So please tune in. Please let anybody else who might be interested in the podcast know that it is there. Please leave a comment, a message, or a rating wherever you are listening to the podcast. And remember, stay as positive and healthy as possible. And see you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You may also be interested in the previously published episodes and posts, which you can find at ms-perspektive.com/podcast. Perspective with a K. You can also get a free PDF with 11 tips for your positive impact on MS at ms-perspektive.com/newsletter. If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach me at nele@ms-perspektive.com or on social media. See you next time.